Energy is of vital importance to the whole of Central Asia. During the Soviet times, when everything was centrally planned from Moscow, the Soviets insisted on the reservoirs in the upstream nations, like Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, being filled during the winter months and then released in the summer months so that the downstream countries, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, could use the water for irrigation purposes. But now, since the end of the Soviet Union and the development of the independent 5 republics in Central Asia, there are no sources of obvious energy where, in return for providing water in the summer season, the Soviet Union used to ensure that the rich coal and oil reserves of some of the downstream nations were sent to the upstream countries to provide them with power during the freezing cold winter months. Now they don't have that facility because, of course, we have no more central planning, no more Moscow ruling the roost. Now we have to provide energy for these countries themselves. And that means countries like Kyrgyzstan, countries like Tajikistan have no option but to build hydropower stations. Now, even during the Soviet times, they recognized the need for this. And they built Nurek, which is a huge 300-meter high dam, damming a reservoir back for 70 kilometers on the Vaksh River. And that provides 3,000 megawatts of electricity, a great deal of it being used for the aluminium plant in Tajikistan. So there is still a deficit of power in Tajikistan. There are still times during the cold winter months when there isn't enough energy to provide the people with heat and light. And that means there needs to be planning for some new hydroelectric schemes. There are no natural reserves of oil and gas of a size that would compensate for the ability to produce energy from water, from hydroelectric schemes. The Soviets even recognized that this would be an issue in the future and had actually started the construction of the Rogun hydroelectric power scheme further up the Vaksh River during the Soviet era. And unfortunately, all of that building project came to an end with the collapse of the Soviet Union. But even by then, they had constructed 45 kilometers of underground tunnels at Rogun. So this was a massive project. And clearly the engineers in the Soviet Union had conceived of the idea of 2 huge power stations. Rogun is planned to have a 330 meter high wall. It will be one of the biggest dams in the world, again with a huge reservoir of water, driving 3,600 megawatts in 6 different turbines. So a major power station. And it will provide enough power then to give heat and light to the whole of Tajikistan, and there will be enough surplus energy to export to countries like Pakistan and Afghanistan. In fact, the infrastructure, the overhead lines, are already being built to enable the export of this energy. And to bring energy to these areas where we've seen constant conflict in Afghanistan, areas of great poverty in both Afghanistan and Pakistan, providing energy and enabling the growth of the economy, enabling business and industry to grow. This is the way to stop conflict. This is the way to stop terrorism. And this is providing a service not only for the whole of Central Asia, but for the West, bringing peace and an end to conflict in these areas by growing the economy and providing jobs is surely the best way ahead.
How would downstream countries' water supply be changed due to the construction of Rogun hydropower plant?
Well, this is a very interesting question because, of course, it is a source of great tension, particularly between Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, and between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, there is a huge lake, the Golden Century Lake, being constructed in Turkmenistan. That is going to draw enormous amounts of water from the Amudarya basin. On the other hand, the Uzbeks are complaining bitterly that the Rogun project in Tajikistan will deprive them of necessary water, even drinking water, as well as water for irrigation purposes in the summer months. I think you have to look at this in a broad context. First of all, back in the 16th century, explorers who were going to Central Asia were writing about the water that was being taken away from the Amudarya, which was called the Oxus River in those days, and predicting that one day, quite soon, the Oxus would dry up. There would be no water left because of all the irrigation canals that were being built, even in the 16th century, and because of the reservoirs in the downstream countries. So this is a problem that has gone on for many years, and it was exacerbated massively by the Soviets. The Soviets introduced the concept of cotton monoculture to Uzbekistan, thinking that they could provide all the cotton requirements of the entire Soviet Union in this fertile area, providing they could build enough reservoirs and canals to irrigate the cotton crops. And you know, when they started developing these massive canals and many different reservoirs, most of them earth-lined, with huge amounts of water losses due to seepage into the soil, evaporation in the heat of the summer. This was very wasteful of the water resources in that area. Then, of course, you had the Karakum Canal built through the Karakum Desert in Turkmenistan, going all the way to Ashgabat, and taking massive amounts of water away from the Amudarya basin. All of this has been extremely wasteful. And when you consider Tajikistan, with its 8,000 plus glaciers and its massive river system, over 900 rivers, is providing 80% of the water for the whole of Central Asia. 80% of it is coming from Tajikistan. Only about 6% of the water for the entire Amudarya basin comes from Uzbekistan, and yet Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan are the biggest users of these water resources that come from the Pamir Mountains and from the Tian Shan Mountains in the upstream countries, in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. So, you know, there has to be some reasonable expectation that everybody can share these resources in a properly managed way. I held a seminar in the European Parliament a couple of years ago and got experts from Spain to come here. Now, they said to me, the amount of the water flow from the Amudarya down to the downstream countries amounts to over 120 cubic kilometers a year. That's a massive amount of water. And they were comparing that to the Segura River in the part of the driest part of Spain, in the plains of Murcia, where with only a fraction of the water available from the Amudarya, they have still managed, despite flooding in the winter time, excessive overuse of water in irrigation and the building of reservoirs, they have still now managed to introduce a system that uses the water properly by concrete lining all the reservoirs and irrigation canals, by droplet irrigation. So with only a fraction of the water, they have no problems. And they are sharing the Segura River with Portugal. It eventually empties into the Mediterranean. And they say to me, you know, with 120 cubic kilometers of water flowing in the Amudarya into the Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan area, they cannot understand why there is so much wastage. Now, the Uzbeks argue that they have reduced their cotton crops, they have reduced their rice crops. They say they have halved the output of cotton and rice. But Uzbekistan is still the world's third largest producer of cotton. And cotton is a very thirsty crop, and it is using a lot of water resources. Rice, of course, we all know, is one of the biggest users of water of any crop in the world. And when I went to Uzbekistan and drove from Nukus to Moynak, which used to be a port on the edge of the Aral Sea, I passed endless cotton fields and rice paddies using massive amounts of water. So I think, you know, it's important for the Uzbeks to continue the work that they're doing in improving the infrastructure, lining their canals and irrigation channels with concrete, lining their reservoirs with concrete, avoiding evaporation as much as they possibly can, and avoiding water loss and seepage into the ground. It's very necessary that they continue with that work and look at different crops, get away from the monoculture of cotton, avoid growing so much rice in an area which is short of water. And then, you know, let's tackle the issue of the flow of water. The Aral Sea has lost half of its volume. It has gone down from an average depth in the 1960s of 52 meters to 23 meters today. Moynak, the fishing port that I went to, it used to land 30,000 tons of fish every year. Now, the old fishing boats are lying rusting on the desert floor, and the sea is 100 miles away. Now, that is man-made climate change that has happened in the course of one generation. So it's, you know, when you see all these things for yourself, and I have been there, I've looked at all these things, then I've traveled to Tajikistan, I've visited Nurek, I've visited now Rogun several times, including a visit where President Ramon himself took me in the underground tunnels and explained the science of the whole project to me. And when you see all of that for yourself, you understand that the Uzbeks complaining that building Rogun is going to deprive them of water just doesn't make sense. For a start, Rogun is built higher up the Vaksh River than Nurek. Now, hydroelectric schemes require a flow of water to turn the turbines to create electricity. You are not taking the water away and disposing of it so that nobody downstream gets it. The water continues to flow. There is a fear that during the 10 years it will take to fill the reservoir behind the Rogun Dam, that this will somehow deprive the downstream countries of water. But already we have a 70-kilometer dam at Nurek, further down the Vaksh River. Tajikistan relies on the energy being produced by Nurek, 3,000 megawatts. If Rogun was going to stop the flow of water to Uzbekistan, it would first stop the flow of water to Nurek and cut off all energy for the whole of Tajikistan. That is simply not going to happen. The water will continue to flow, it will be properly managed, and in my view, the downstream countries will not be denied any less water than they have at the present time. In fact, it may be better managed. So I think looking historically at the whole picture, where there has always been mismanagement of water in the downstream nations, which got worse during the Soviet times, and looking at even the recognition by the Soviets that they had to build hydropower schemes like Nurek and Rogun to better manage this whole process. I think now you can see that the realization of the project at Rogun will actually improve the situation for everybody and not simply for Tajikistan.
What are the risks of construction of Rogun hydropower plant?
Well, of course, when we talk about the risks of building Rogun, you are looking at the potential for seismic activity. Remember, Tajikistan and the Vaksh River is in the middle of a high earthquake zone, a high seismic activity zone. But again, you know, when Nurek was built by the Soviets, they recognized this, and they built this massive 300-meter high dam with boulders and clay, and like everything the Soviets did, it was over-engineered because they recognized there was a danger of earthquakes. And the boulder and clay construction is flexible. So when you have earthquakes, it absorbs the shock without breaking the dam. It has stood for 40 years. It has withstood countless, maybe hundreds of earthquakes, some of them massive earthquakes, you know, over 7 or 8 on the Richter scale. And yet it has remained completely undamaged and continued to function properly because it was properly engineered. And based on that design, Rogun is being built in exactly the same way. So, you know, provided the lessons of Nurek are copied in the building of Rogun, I cannot see that there will be any danger.
What would the construction of Rogun HPP mean to the population of Tajikistan?
Well, for the population of Tajikistan, who in the coldest months of winter, when temperatures plummet to sometimes, you know, below minus 40 degrees centigrade, and suddenly the lights go out because there is no more power, because even Nurek cannot provide enough power to keep the lights burning in the cities and towns and villages of Tajikistan. It is the absolute priority of President Rahman and his government to provide energy to keep his people you know, with heat and light and the ability to cook in the coldest months of winter. And, you know, Rogun will provide this energy. Already we see Nurek is providing 3,000 megawatts a year. You know, to provide an additional 3,600 megawatts is of key importance for all the people of Tajikistan. Plus, it will increase the economic benefits for everybody by earning income for the Tajik economy, because the surplus electricity can be sold to Pakistan and Afghanistan and other neighboring countries.
What would happen to the population living in Rogun's HPP's area?
Well, the population living around Nurek have found great benefits from being associated with one of the biggest hydropower projects in the world, and I anticipate that the population of Rogun will have the same benefits. Not only will they benefit from the production of electricity from this huge hydropower plant, they will also be living on the edge of this massive reservoir, which will have great tourist potential. I mean, when you see the 70-kilometer reservoir at Nurek, this is a beautiful inland lake in the mountains, in the Pamir Mountains, and is of wonderful tourist potential. I think the development of tourism, which is gradually taking off in Tajikistan, will in future owe a great deal to these natural reservoirs in Nurek and Rogun.
What benefits did Tajikistan's neighboring countries have with the construction of Rogun?
Well, as I've covered already, the benefits to Pakistan and Afghanistan of being able to buy electricity from Rogun, you really could not put a price on those benefits, because those areas they have very little by way of economic strength. They have to rely on agriculture. They have almost medieval ways of trying to make a living in those countries. And this exacerbates tension, exacerbates poverty, and means that terrorism finds a ready area to grow where there is great poverty, great deprivation, and people feel that the only way that they can change things is through violence. So providing energy and helping business and industry to grow and helping the creation of jobs will obviate this cancer that has grown in those areas, the cancer of poverty. And I think that is a priceless benefit. But there are benefits also for the downstream neighbours of Tajikistan. Now, if Uzbekistan could overcome its antipathy to Rogun and could start to understand that by talking to its upstream neighbours and by coming to a peaceful arrangement over the management of water, over the sharing of energy resources, I think President Karimov and President Rahmon would have a great deal to talk about and a great deal in common, and this would resolve the tensions that have beset the whole of Central Asia for far too long. I think President Karimov really has to become more realistic about this issue.
Where do you see Tajikistan in 10 years after construction of Rogun Dam?
Well, I think after Rogun begins to produce electricity, and after the economy of Tajikistan is really reinvented, because it will have adequate power to power big business, big industry, and to provide power to all the people of Tajikistan, I see the economy growing very rapidly. We've seen the success, the economic success of Kazakhstan, which really is one of the most powerful countries in Central Asia economically. I think Tajikistan can mirror that success, but it needs energy to do so, and it needs to end the conflict and tension with its neighbours by convincing them that this project at Rogun is a project that is to the benefit of all of Central Asia, not only to Tajikistan.
Where do you see Tajikistan in 10 years without the construction of Rogun Dam?
Well, I'm afraid if the international community decides to give the thumbs down to Rogun and objects to the project being completed, remembering that billions of dollars have already been invested in the maintenance and construction of Rogun, I think it would be a tragic disaster for the whole Tajik economy, but also for the whole of Central Asia and for Afghanistan and Pakistan. So I see Tajikistan in 10 years' time without Rogun still struggling to build its economy, struggling to provide electricity for its people, for its business and industry, unable to export surplus electricity to its neighbours, still in tension with its downstream neighbours because they have refused to allow or persuaded the world community to refuse to allow the Rogun project to go ahead. It would be disastrous, and really Rogun must go ahead.
The personal message to our viewers, what would you say?
Well, I would say that the Rogun project has been an inspirational project recognized many years ago by the Soviets. And, it's going forward now with the use of modern technology and modern science to build an entirely safe hydroelectric power scheme that will benefit Tajikistan and all its neighbours. It must go ahead. President Rahmon said to me on a visit to Rogun, only God can stop this project.